I was Haniyashi, but Rico from Street Scores, and we have three main things to talk about today. Let's get into it. First of all, Dan Quinn said before practice this morning, y'all already know I'm going to do a full breakdown of practice later today. I'm going to be a little bit busy today, but trust me, it's on the way in the evening. But either way, he said that Jayden Daniels will play in the first preseason game versus the Jets. I want to break down why that may not have been as obvious as a lot of people think. Then the Washington Commanders also went out and signed a new defensive tackle, also cut a corner to do so. We're going to dive into that, especially on why sometimes we may cut a certain position group, but then add another position group to replace that guy rather than just keeping it within the position group. And then we also have more roster cuts and adds, and we're going to break all of that down from the stuff that happened last week when we added Byron Pringle and a new kicker and released two receivers to do so. But before we dive into all of that, make sure you stiff arm that like button, stiff arm the subscription button, and stiff arm the bell next to that subscription button so you get notification each and every time I release an informative and opinionated video just like this one. Make sure you stay tuned for all of the content. Really appreciate y'all for keeping up with all of the training camp breakdowns that I'm doing every day. I was supposed to do this video last night, but just ended up extra busy. But I'm kind of happy that I'm doing it this morning now because the whole Jayden Daniels will play his first preseason game, all of that type of stuff just came out. So I'm, kind of worked out in the end. But make sure y'all stay tuned. I'm not going to waste any more of y'all time. Just make sure you leave a like on this video. Definitely comment your opinions on everything. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get to it, man. Let's get it. Adam. All right, so first of all, Dan Quinn said before practice today, and again, just to remind you, I will do a full hour-long breakdown of what went down in practice, position group by position group, like I always do, so stay tuned for that. That'll probably be later on this evening. But either way, Dan Quinn said that Jayden Daniels will play in the Commanders' first preseason game of 2024 against the New York Jets on Saturday at MetLife Stadium in New Jersey. Shouts out to the Commanders for not babying Jayden Daniels like how the Bears are babying Caleb Williams. But first of all, preseason debut for Jayden Daniels. Off rip, extra excited. Can't wait to see what he does against them. And on one hand, this may have seemed fairly obvious until you think about the fact that a lot of teams may not play their starters in the first preseason games in general. Neither CJ Stroud nor fellow rookie first overall draft pick Jayden Daniels, the second overall draft pick Caleb Williams, played in that preseason game from a few days ago. So Jayden Daniels playing versus the Jets wasn't as automatic as people may think because, again, the Bears are trying to protect Caleb Williams. He's a rookie. You can understand CJ Stroud. He had the rookie season that he had last year. He is obviously the starting quarterback. What's the point of even playing him in that first game? You can start to play him in the later games as they start to ramp up and get warmed up for the regular season. Understandable, but Caleb Williams is still a rookie, and unless he just has this full mastery of the offense somehow this soon, I may have played him at least for a series. We'll see how long Jayden Daniels ends up playing. But again, back to my point, this may not have been as obvious as people think because other rookie quarterbacks may not play, especially the ones that may be projected starters, may not play in the first preseason game. But luckily for us, Jayden Daniels will. And the main reason that it was safe to assume that Jayden Daniels would play in the first preseason game against the Jets is because we still technically do have a quarterback competition right now. Which again, I understand why Dan Quinn is going about it like this. I just personally wouldn't go about it like this. I would have named Jayden Daniels a starter out loud to everybody by now for sure. But since Dan Quinn is setting this up as like a legitimate quarterback competition between Jayden Daniels and Marcus Mariota, then naturally the quarterback competition would spill into the preseason games as well to further evaluate who's the better quarterback and try to get that information out of it and things like that. I'm pretty sure the joint practices are going to be very telling, but technically we have a quarterback competition in our hands, and that's going to spill into the preseason game versus the Jets. Technically, with the way that Dan Quinn is going about this, unless he ends up announcing that Jayden Daniels is a starter before that preseason game even happens. But if he hasn't done it at this point, it seems like more than likely he's going to wait until at least after that first preseason game. He may wait even longer than that. We'll see. But regardless, the main thing is I'm super excited about seeing Jayden Daniels finally go up against a non-Commanders defense. Because how will he adjust to a defense that he doesn't have down pack at this point? Like, what's his response to not only a more established defense, just in general, a defense that is proven from what they did last year and the talent that they have on their team, but also just a new defense, even if it weren't necessarily a good defense that we were up against, and the Jets defense is really good on top of it. But the fact that it's a new defense is already a whole nother challenge for Jayden Daniels just in itself at base value. I mean, a defense that Jayden Daniels hasn't had any time working and adapting against, that's a new thing, man. He will not know their weaknesses off rip just going into every day of practice like he does with this defense at this point in time, like where he knows everybody's tendencies and what are they good at, what are they bad at, how quick are they, what's their typical habits as far as we give them this look and this is how they adjust to it and things like that. He's kind of had like the answers to the test, not even necessarily answers to the test walking into every practice, but at least he has like a general outline of these are the tendencies of these guys. This is what they typically like to do in certain situations. So it was kind of like an open book test, essentially, to kind of like give it an analogy as far as how Jayden Daniels has gone into these practices in training camp the last few practices. Him having good days against the Commanders is great and all. I mean, it's more telling if he weren't having bad days. If Jayden Daniels was looking bad at this point, that would be like a huge red flag and, oh, this is a big negative. But the fact that he's doing really well, we don't exactly know how much to take from that, but at least he's passing every test in front of him. We're going to break that down. But if Jayden Daniels looks great against the Jets in joint practices and the preseason game, then we can really start to get hype about our chances of maybe making some noise this season. I mean, he passed every test that he's been given so far, which I want to really break it down because we can't necessarily jump the gun and assume that Jayden Daniels will be the savior yet, because these training camp practices that he's had so far have basically been the equivalent to like an early morning quiz. As soon as you walk into class, you already know what you're about to get into. Answers are typically pretty easy. And now the joint practices will kind of be like somewhat of like an equivalent to pop quizzes. And then the preseason games will kind of be like projects or like mid-term tests or something like that, and then actual preseason games will be finals. So again, he's aced everything they've asked him to do so far, but what exactly has he been asked to do? And so the real challenges that await him will really show us, is he really that good? Like, what has he really faced up to this point? We're about to find out real soon, man. And of course, I will be live streaming and watching that preseason game and analyzing and breaking everything down live. So make sure you pull up for that, of course. But man, I'm telling you, Jayden Daniels has done everything that you could ask him to do at this point and more. But the point is, I mean, we're so early on. I mean, what has he actually been asked to do? I mean, and I think this defense is potentially going to be a top 10 defense at least. So this is not like just a slouch of a defense, but this is the same defense that he's been practicing against for several months now. I can't wait to see what the next test looks like for him going against a defense that he has yet to practice against. This is his first foreign defense since he's gotten to the NFL level. I'm excited to see what he looks like. Now, moving on to the next part of this video, the second of 3 parts, the Commanders went and signed defensive tackle Taylor Stallworth this morning. And of course, to clear that roster spot for Taylor Stallworth, they had to cut somebody. So they decided to release cornerback Christian Holmes, who's a 2022 7th round draft pick. And John Kahn brings up a good point. Christian Holmes did show good signs of special teams last year, but Washington has a lot of DBs who are good at special teams, and maybe he just hasn't stood out enough. Maybe we just have other guys, most notably like my boy Tyler Owens, that's standing out enough to where Christian Holmes is a little bit more expendable. We'll see. And shouts out Nikki Javala for pointing out this as well, because she said of the 33 players that the Commanders drafted the previous 4 years between 2020 through the 2023 draft, she said that I think only 6 are true locks to make the final 53-man roster, which is insane. I mean, on one end, that's just like Ron Rivera and Martin Mayhew. What were y'all doing while y'all were here? And then on the other end, that just shows that Adam Peters and Dan Quinn, it shows you how they felt about this roster. Remember in Adam Peters' first initial press conference, they asked him some questions to the extent of, how do you feel about this roster? Will you have to make any changes? And then he literally had nothing to say for like 5 seconds. It was like the longest silence for 5 seconds ever, man. You could just tell he was like, yo, this roster sucks. And then you saw what we did in free agency in the draft, complete overhaul and things like that. And so again, you can just tell by the fact that with the moves that they're making, that they did not like the guys that were here last year. And there's a reason that we only won 4 games last season. But either way, going back to the point that Niki Javala brought up, of the 33 players that the Commanders drafted in the past 4 drafts, again, 2020 through 2023, do we only have 6 guys that are true locks? I mean, I'm curious to who y'all feel like she's potentially talking about in the comment section right now, if you want to do so. But to me, I think she's automatically talking about Samuel Cosmi, obviously, Quan Martin, Brian Robinson, Jahan Dotson, Emmanuel Forbes, and Benjamin St. Juste. Those seem to be like the lockiest of locks on the team right now out of those guys that were drafted in that time span. But I also feel like De'Ami Brown and John Bates may be safer than what most people think, just based on what I've seen and heard from training camp so far, including things that Dan Quinn has said himself about those 2 guys, especially John Bates, with Quinn saying that he was one of the 5 standouts out of the entire team once they finally put on the pad. But Dan Quinn has gone out of his way to compliment both of those guys. De'Ami Brown, I believe, even more than once. So don't be sleep on those 2 guys as well. So we have 6 locky locks, and then we have 2 like kinda locks as well. But I think there's really 8 guys that will end up making this team since Ron Rivera came here in 2020 and drafted them. But that's incredible that it's only 8 guys potentially remaining from the draft picks that Ron Rivera has made. That's just absolutely insane. It's a really bad look on Ron Rivera's part, but it's also a very optimistic look on Adam Peters and Dan Quinn's part. The fact that they're not afraid to completely just do a clean sweep. Like, I know when you uproot a team like this, you're typically expecting to have some sort of growing pains to start off, and they're not afraid of that. They're looking towards the long term. Yeah, week 1 maybe there will be some chemistry issues and things like that of week 1 and year 1, but later on down the line, we will be very grateful that they completely cleaned house, especially roster wise. Now moving on to the article by David Harrison on Sports Illustrated, breaking down the defensive tackle that we signed. Again, his name is Taylor Stallworth, and he's a 7th-year defensive tackle, and he worked out with the Commanders last week and has plenty of experience playing multiple positions in their scheme, and that's coming directly from his agent himself, like Taylor Stallworth's agent. Now, continuing with the article from David Harrison, he says Stallworth came out of South Carolina in 2018 as an undrafted free agent who signed with the New Orleans Saints and got his first game action in the same season, playing in 14 games, recovering 1 fumble and recording 1 sack. Bouncing around the league a bit since then, Stallworth has also appeared in regular season games for the Indianapolis Colts, Houston Texans, Kansas City Chiefs, and Tennessee Titans. His first career start came with the Colts in 2020, and his best season so far came with the same team in 2021 when he had 3 sacks. But in his career, Stallworth has 4.5 sacks in 58 career games with 2 starts in complete totality. So it's not like we're just signing this super high ceiling guy that is super flashed. I mean, the very little, and I'm really trying to emphasize the very little tape that I just saw on him, just for like a quick couple of minutes, highlights and things like that I could find. It's not like this is just a thank goodness we got him. We may have found a gem out there in free agency and things like that. Just a random guy we signed in training camp that we could expect to come in and have a large impact. I'm not expecting that at all, but I am intrigued by the fact that they decided to bring in a defensive tackle at this point. Is our defensive tackle group is not as good as they expected? Are we not as deep as they expected? Is this more of like a Fedarian Mathis is not as good as what we'd expect, that we hoped he'd be at this point? Remember, Brian Robinson had a big, like 40-plus yard touchdown run a couple of practices ago, and it was like clearly Fedarian Mathis's fault. Like, he completely did not do what he was supposed to do, holding down his spot on the defensive line, and then he got chewed out by defensive lines coach Daryl Tapp for it. And I already thought Fedarian Mathis's writing was already on the wall, just based off of how just unnoticeable. I mean, I feel like that's the best way to describe him, how unnoticeable he's been on this team since we drafted him a couple of years ago. But then you come in with this new regime, and you're one of the very few guys from the previous regime that they allowed to stay around, and then you're gonna go out there and allow big 40-plus yard touchdowns by running backs and just completely moved out the way by the offensive line, which we still have some sort of concerns about in itself. I mean, Phidarian Mathis is not looking good for you. But my main point is, again, this signing is not just this man. We signed a gem, or like we found a guy that was playing at an elite level in his prime, but now he's at the end of his prime. Nothing like that. This is just an undrafted free agent that's kind of bounced around the NFL a little bit. They're bringing him for depth. They clearly are coveting some sort of like veteran leadership when it comes to this, a guy that's been around, because right now that's the only like significant trait that I see going his way, is that he's been on several teams, he's a veteran, he's been around for some time. Maybe they want a little bit more leadership in that defensive tackle room. Who knows, even though they're already led by Jonathan Allen and Deron Payne, and I'm very excited about Johnny Newton, and I love John Ridgeway as well. I feel like at the very least we have 4 very good interior defensive linemen, but clearly I guess they felt it wasn't enough. But again, I really want to emphasize that this is not just this signing that I'm about to hype up and act like we just signed the next Ndamukong Suh or Aaron Donald or anything like that at all. But this also goes to show that Dan Quinn and Adam Peters are keeping to their promises, because they did say several times that they will constantly improve this team every chance that they get, and they weren't playing because we're only 8 practices in. Well, now we're 9 as I'm basically talking, but by the time we signed this guy, we were only 8 training camp practices in, 8.5 because I believe they practiced yesterday, but it was so short and it wasn't open to the public, to the media members, or nothing like that. But like, we're only this far into training camp, only like a little over a week's worth of practices, and they've already made a few cuts and additions. We're going to talk about the rest of them later in the last third of this video. But either way, they're looking for any gain, no matter how marginal, for this roster. And also, it's also interesting to see when a team signs a player of a certain position group, like I talked about earlier before the intro, because then they go and cut a player from a different position group to make space for that guy. I mean, what does that exactly mean? Like in this case, are we deeper at defensive back, or at least deeper at defensive backs that can play special teams, but then we weren't as deep at defensive tackle? Is this a bad sign for Phidarian Mathis, like I just talked about? Or is this more so like a good sign for my dog Tyler Owens at safety, especially special teams wise, or somebody like a Chigi Anusium who, you know, cornerback wise, now he moves up the depth chart even just ever so slightly, just because one of the corners ahead of you is now gone. They didn't replace him with another corner. They just got rid of him. Now you naturally just move up the depth chart because there's less people in front of you. And again, like when you cut a defensive lineman to gain a defensive lineman, it's far more obvious why the move was made, why that transaction even happened. But when it's interpositional, and yeah, I believe I just made that word up, but it made sense in my head. But when the transaction involves 2 different position groups, you cut one guy from one position group and then you add a guy from another position group, there's a lot more questions about the motives out there for this one. So I guess we'll get closer to knowing why they cut a corner and then signed a D tackle later on down the line. But at the end of the day, all that really matters is that the new defensive tackle we signed is good. Hopefully, that's the only thing that really matters at the end of the day. Hopefully the guys we're signing are good and the guys that we're cutting are bad. And at the very least, hopefully he's better than Phidarian Mathis, but we'll see. Now moving on to the last third of this video, we also had some moves last week that I didn't get the time and chance to break down until now. Remember that we signed wide receiver Byron Pringle. We claimed kicker Riley Patterson off for waivers from Jacksonville, but we ended up releasing wide receivers Damiere Byrd and Dax Milne because of it. And first of all, Damiere Byrd and Dax Milne were not making this roster anyways, regardless, no matter what. So let's go ahead and just get that out the way first. A few days ago, Dan Quinn talked about how the only 2 people who have really stood out kick return wise on this team, especially once we put the pads on, were Casimir Allen and Mike Sainristil. But like I've already explained, especially in deeper detail in one of my training camp breakdowns, Sainristil is far too valuable on defense to put him in harm's way like that on special teams and kickoff returns. So that just leaves us with only one notable kick returner, at least, that Dan Quinn actually really likes so far, and that's Casimir Allen. But there are 2 kick returners on kick returns, so that's basically we had an opening there. They're still looking for another guy to basically go opposite of Casimir Allen. So at this point, I mean, is Casimir Allen a roster lock as one of our kick returners that he's going to make the 53-man roster just because of that alone, even though he has been making plays as a receiver as well. But then comes in Byron Pringle as a signing to potentially compete for that kick return spot opposite of Casimir Allen. But my main point is, if all Bird and Dax Milne can contribute to this team for real is just returning, and then Dan Quinn says that 2 other people stood out other than them, then the writing was on the wall. So I wasn't the least bit surprised by these cuts. It was more so a matter of when than if. I mean, are we going to wait to cut them until we cut it down to 53 after the 3rd preseason game? But either way, moving on, then you have Ben Standig of The Athletic breaking down the signing of Riley Patterson and where he came from, his history and all of that. And again, I didn't want to do a video breaking down and giving my opinions on the matter until I went and did my own research, and I felt like Ben Standig did a great job of wrapping up everything pertaining to Riley Patterson, where he comes from, all of that type of stuff. So again, Ben Standig said in his article, kicker Riley Patterson, released last week by the Jaguars, was claimed off of waivers by the Washington Commanders. Remember, we are second in waiver wire order too. I mean, that's one of the very few advantages to having 4 wins the previous season. The Panthers, even though they didn't pick first overall, remember they traded that draft pick to the Bears in order to get Bryce Young, which just looks even crazier now. But they're first in waiver wire priority because they were literally the worst team in the NFL last year. We're second. So whenever a player gets cut, like a kicker, like Riley Patterson, we are second out of the NFL who, as far as like having the quickest chance of getting them before anybody else. The only team that could potentially take a guy off of waivers that we want before us are the Panthers. That's it. Everybody else is behind us. If we want them, we can get them, including Riley Patterson. Now, Washington has began searching for kicker help after releasing Brandon McManus in May following the sexual assault allegations. And that's the craziest part. Really sit back and think about it. We really felt like we had kicker solved. We brought over a new special teams coordinator in Larry Izzo. We brought in a new long snapper in Tyler Ott, who was once made a Pro Bowl. So we're going from Cameron Cheeseman, arguably the worst long snapper I've ever seen, to a Pro Bowl long snapper in Tyler Ott. And then we signed Brandon McManus, who was a really good kicker throughout his time so far in his career in the NFL. So I was like, okay, special teams, we're done with that. Something to not have to worry about for the remainder of the offseason. This was before the draft. This was with free agency and things like that. I was like, okay, through free agency, we pretty much just solved special teams. We're good to go. We even brought over the special teams linebacker from the Detroit Lions, like a special teams ace. They were making moves. Special teams was good to go. Then out of nowhere, Brandon McManus got involved in all of this chaos. We ended up having to cut him. So now we have this big need for a kicker. A very big need. Kickers can win you and lose you games, man. And I'm very afraid of our kicking situation right now. I feel like it's very underrated how much of a problem we have there. A lot of people, I'm not necessarily saying people are ignoring the problem, but I don't feel like it's being acknowledged enough. Because kickers, they're hard to find right now. And then you have other teams out there hogging more than one. Like more than one good one. There are teams out there with 2 kickers who are both better than the 2 kickers we have, including Riley Patterson right now. But at a certain point, by the time we get to the regular season, everybody's gonna have to cut it down to 1 kicker. So we will have our shot at better kickers later, but it would be nice if we can get one sooner before we have to wait until the regular season. And he's basically introducing himself to the rest of the team going into like the last week of practice before we got to get ready to play the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Tampa Bay. That's not the ideal situation. But either way, going back to the Ben Standig article, he said the Commanders have monitored the kicker scenarios around the league, knowing that several teams had multiple kickers in camp. Others will hit the waiver wire before week 1, just like I basically said. Now Washington has 2 heading towards his preseason opener at the New York Jets on August 10th. I'm really excited to stream that in 6 days. By the way, Riley Patterson, who turns 25 in September, not that old, still a young guy, made 59 of 67 field goal attempts and 93 of his 97 extra points so far into his career. That's not terrible. He made 16 of 18 field goal attempts and 35 of his 37 extra point tries just last year for the Detroit Lions and the Browns before joining the Jaguars this offseason. The 3-year veteran is 3 of 6 on field goal attempts, 50 or more yards, which is not great at all. It sounds like he's a guy that's fairly accurate but doesn't have a big leg. We'll see though, because we're gonna need him to have that big leg, especially with these new kickoff rules and things like that. I would prefer if we could just kick it out the back of the end zone, but we'll see what type of strategy Larry Izzo, Dan Quinn, and all of those guys come up with. We'll see. But we definitely, I mean, with the new kickoff rules now, you don't need to have as big of a leg as you used to need. Like, so now having a big leg, the only reason that it really benefits a kicker is for long field goals, which is really their most important job. But kickoff wise, you know how, you know, teams typically try to look for big leg, strong leg kickers, because we tried to get those kickoffs with the old kickoff rules, the way that they've been for forever, trying to get it back out the end zone so guys don't have an opportunity to return it. But now with the new kickoff rules, I mean, you don't even, I could probably even kick it out of the back of the end zone at this point. So we really only need a big leg for kickoff, so that, you know, Riley Patterson, guys like that are more accurate than necessarily having strong legs, they get to eat more now in the current NFL climate. But you still got to be able to make your long field goals, man. You really do. But again, 3 of 6 on attempts 50 or more yards is not ideal, but it's probably better than what we have in Ramiz Ahmed right now. And so playing for Jacksonville in 2022, Patterson kicked a game-winning 36-yard field goal to cap a wild card playoff round comeback victory over the Chargers. He also joins Ramiz Ahmed on the training camp roster. Washington signed Ahmed, who played briefly in the UFL this spring. Remember, just to emphasize this, Ahmed was the backup to Chris Blewett in the UFL. Just to remind you of where this guy came from. Like, that doesn't sound good. Lucas Havrasik worked out for the team earlier this offseason, but was not retained. And I mean, we've had, like, during voluntary OTAs, some type of kicker tryouts and things like that. Somehow Ramiz Ahmed won that, and right now he's competing against Riley Patterson, who we just signed, to see who's going to be our starting kicker. But I'm still hoping that we go out there and find somebody. I really wanted Jake Bates, but then the Lions swooped them up before we even had a chance. And I warned y'all even before Jake Bates was available that the Lions were interested, so I wasn't the least bit surprised when they swooped them up away from us. But I was sick to my stomach. I'm hoping that we're still searching for more kickers, because I'm not very confident that either of these two guys, and Riley Patterson or Ramiz Ahmed, are the answer so far. But going back to Byron Pringle real quick, with the point that I went into great detail about this in one of my training camp breakdowns, but my boy Ken Johannesson at Burgundy Burner brings up a great point. I completely agree. He said that the signing of Byron Pringle was not about the wide receiver room. It was 100% about special teams. The receivers that were released were never going to be on the final roster. Like I already said, Byron Pringle will get a serious look for special teams duty and bring some value as a receiver, which he has so far in practice already. He's already making plays as a receiver in drills and things like that. And then he also said that Riley Patterson has a decent chance of sticking around as the kicker this year and perhaps beyond the 2024 season. I completely agree. And shouts out to my boy Josh Taylor. Make sure you follow him as well, because he's been going to the training camp practices, seeing these guys in person, and he said something to the extent of that he feels like Riley Patterson will end up winning this kicker competition. He didn't exactly dive into why, but he said that he likes him and he likes the way that he kicks, and he basically passes the eye test a little bit better than Ramiz Ahmed. We'll see what happens here. I will keep y'all updated on that. Of course, they just practiced today, so once I do my breakdown of that, we're going to do a checkup on what's going on with that kicker competition so far as special teams goes in that video when I do it later this evening. So stay tuned for that. Make sure you pull back up for that. But yeah, man, that's the end of this video. Please get in the comment section. Let me know how you feel about everything discussed in this video. Please stiff arm that like button, stiff arm the subscription button, stiff arm the bell next to that subscription button so you get notification each and every time I release an informative and opinionated video just like this one. Make sure you stay tuned for all of the content. Again, I want to keep emphasizing that I will be coming out with the training camp breakdown analysis of what happened in practice today. So make sure you stay tuned for that. I'm hearing great things about Jayden Daniels. I'm hearing great things about the cornerbacks as well so far from what I'm seeing, but I will break it down position group by position group in my typical around hour-long video, so stay tuned for that. But of course, concerning this video, let me know how you feel about everything discussed in this video. Let me know in the comment section if you agree or disagree with any of my points. The Jayden Daniels situation with him starting in the preseason game and not being named the starter yet. Let me know how you feel about the transaction of adding a defensive tackle but cutting a corner. Let me know how you feel about us adding Riley Patterson and his chances of winning the kicker competition and bringing in Byron Pringle while releasing Dax Milne and Damiere Byrd. Let me know how you feel about all of that. Make sure you leave this video and leave a like while you do it. Do not leave this video, leave it a like. I really appreciate y'all. I'm all over the place. I appreciate y'all. Catch y'all later. I'm out.